Thank you, David. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. As David said, I'm going to be talking about the labor market and focused on the period 2000 to 2015 and focused on a handful of affluent countries, but we're going to see some historical stuff as well here as I move through the data and try and provide you with an overview and a summary, not only of what is in this year's report, but also a little bit about previous work that I've done as part of this project. That this is the third meeting. The takeaway points, I'm going to start at the end and work back to justify these points. First of all, employment in the United States is lower than in the peer nations, we're calling them here, Germany, France, and the UK. 84% of prime-age men, that is men 25 to 54 years old, are employed. Sounds like a lot. 84% of anything is a substantial number, but it compares to a past in which between 90 and 96% of men of that age bracket were employed, and as recently as 2007, 88% were. So we're 4 percentage points behind the beginning of the recession. Among women, although the United States was an early mover in incorporating women into the labor market, the most recent number is 70% of prime-age women are currently employed, or were currently employed last December, and that is also lower than what we see in Germany, France, and the UK. In fact, among the set of 22 countries that are in some of the charts, the U.S. ranked 16th in men's employment and 18th in women's employment. The U.S. also had the 6th biggest drop during the Great Recession. So we did have a deeper jobs recession than most of the peer countries did. Only the headline-grabbing countries of Ireland, Hungary, Greece, Spain, and Iceland had it worse. And U.S. employment is still well below where it was prior to the recession, despite a record 38 months of 200,000 plus jobs added. So that's where we're going. That's what you'll be quizzed on. And here's where it comes from. First, let's take a slightly longer view. Moving back, this is from last year's report. We're looking at the last 30 years, 1985 to the most recent available data. Let's start with the women. We see the recession hits and their employment drops, and it creeps back up, and we're falling short of that. This is a bigger, longer-lasting recession than previous ones. Similar thing happened last time. In fact, the peak of American women's prime-age labor force participation was in the last months of the Clinton administration. In December of 2000 and January of 2001, the highest ever percentage of American women were working, and it was knocked down by the ensuing 2001 recession. Didn't quite get back and got knocked down again and hasn't gotten back. The story among the men is similar with a higher amplitude, a bigger pair of impacts. The 2001 recession hit men harder than it hit women. The 2008 recession, the Great Recession, hit men harder than it hit women. Men's recovery has been a bit greater, but men are actually only about halfway back in the most recent data. We can reach even back here. This is what used to happen. Women's labor force was cruising up. Recession stalled it, and it resumed its upward climb around the 1990 recession. That was also true going back all the way to the 60s. But in fact, American men's employment has not recovered from a recession since the 1960s. Now, sometimes that's only a percentage point short, but it never quite gets back. This is the month to month. Those previous numbers were smooth. I didn't smooth this chart, so we're seeing all that shaggy little month to month fluctuation. A black dot's the end of a recession. The trough of a recession, and then the white dot is the beginning of the next recession. And if we look back here, all the way back to the 50s, recession, drop, recovery after a couple of them, especially the long growth of the 60s. But since then, every successive recession has knocked men's employment down, and it hasn't gone all the way back up after the recession. Some recovery afterwards, but it never gets back. Men's peak employment in the United States appears to be 1953. 96.5%. It's an astounding labor utilization back then, and not many women were working back then, and less than half. So overall, the population was in fact more gainfully employed in the 1990s than in the 1950s. But among the men, the story gets worse every recession after the 60s. How's that look? This is a session on comparative analysis. Let's look at some other countries. This is 22 countries in the list. Used to be known as the Luxembourg Income Study. Now it's just list because people think, who cares about Luxembourg? Well, we do, because that's where, except for the work that Janet does, that's where a lot of the data cleaning and storage gets done. But it's not the core country of the project. It's the locus of the data archive. What we see here, the countries are ranked according to their 2010 employment of males, prime age employment among men in 2010. That is, for most of these countries, at or near the bottom of the Great Recession. We see Germany, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Czech Republic, Austria at the top. Australia at the top. And down at 6 from the bottom, the United States, below Estonia, Spain, Greece, Hungary, and Ireland. Ranking them according to the drop, we have to also account for Iceland, which also had a big drop, but from a very high number to a above average number. Women's employment, well, let's take a split second here and note, men's employment actually increased during the recession for Germany. The white dots are the pre-recession employment levels circa 2004. Women and men increased their employment during the recession in Germany. Luxembourg, too, many of these top ranked countries that we see increases for women's employment. Germany stands out with the increase for men, as does Poland. All the other countries see a drop. The biggest drops are in the countries that were totally hammered by the financial crisis, including the United States. The U.S. ranks 6th in job loss during the Great Recession. Some annual details for the comparison set of countries. We see the American case. Now the timeline is shrunk, so the drop looks even more thrilling. You can make time trends do that by making the time, putting a lot of years real close together. But it was real. I mean, the recession was scary, and it especially hit employment. It didn't do that in these other countries. And why not? One thought is, well, their banks weren't hit as hard. That's true. Their GDP wasn't hit as hard, but it was hit. Britain had a double dip recession in the course of they started a recovery and lost it and then resumed. And yet they did not lose jobs to half the extent that the United States did. And as noted before, Germany had on net employment gain. They did have about a 9-month period during which employment declined, but it bounced back. Likewise, the women's employment continued upward, except for a bit of a drop that may or may not be true. These are two different data sources, and we may or may not want to believe this drop for German women. Likewise, France and Germany were latecomers to the engagement of women in the labor force, and so they're running. They used to run well behind the United States. Around 1995 or 2000, they caught up. Now they're ahead. More women 25 to 54 years old are employed in those countries now than in the United States. What are they doing? This is the story of employment protection. At one time, critics of it, David referred to efficiency costs of things. The critics of the European model refer to this as Eurosclerosis. You can't get rid of somebody in less than a year. And in most of these countries, the recession was over by the end of the year, and so why get rid of them now? But that's a very effective way of keeping people in the labor force. It's if bosses can't get rid of you just because the economy is down, it keeps you in the labor force. If you have that, and I'm no macroeconomist, I'm a sociologist, but apparently in these countries, that long-term effect of that appears to have been a stabilization of the labor markets during the course of the recession. There's, I think I've got 3-4 minutes here. Are there lessons? Well, if there are lessons, they might come up in comparing, these are OECD data on two ways of looking at GDP. GDP per capita, which is a famously widely used and widely abused and widely dissed measure of economic performance because it hides inequality. So in the United States, throughout the recession, actually, GDP per capita was growing, even though the economy was supposed to be in such dire straits. And since then, there's been a remarkable recovery of GDP per capita in the United States, even outperforming Germany in parallel with Canada, and slightly better than the whole OECD taken into account. But the story for the labor market is actually better told in GDP per hour worked. And what's happened in the United States is that famous efficiency story. Through the recession, the United States didn't lose GDP per hour work. In fact, in the early part of the recession, the economy gained on this ratio because the economy lost more hours than it did dollars. So that the people who were laid off, other people picked up the slack, other people worked longer hours, and on net, the GDP per hour worked in the early part of the recession increased, and we haven't seen any growth in GDP per hour worked since then. So the job creation, the 38 months of job creation that we've seen is keeping pace with the general performance of the economy. But it needs to go faster than that in order to actually create a full recovery. So Europe had higher employment before the recession, less drop during the recession. But I think the key factor is that there is more job protection in Europe. What you're going to hear from the next couple of speakers is the story of the rest of the comparison, which has to do with what do you get for that time on the job, and in neither here nor there is there much wage growth, and the lingering long-term effect of this recession appears to be showing up in exactly these indicators, and I don't know whether we're going to poverty or wages next, but we'll keep moving on these themes as the next speakers come up. So, do I take questions now, or we're going to do them all at the end? All at the end. Okay. Thank you. Then I'm going to stop.